So when people talk about cryptocurrencies and then they say, well, which ones are cryptocurrencies and which ones are digital tokens? Well, they're all digital tokens. They're all digital tokens. We just call certain of them cryptocurrencies just because we're familiar with them and because they're often used, to transact business or as a store of value. So for example, Bitcoin and Ether, people sometimes call cryptocurrencies, but they're still digital tokens. And digital tokens, what they ultimately are, they're just a string of numbers on a digital distributed ledger. So it's not a coin per se. It's not something that you can hold in your hand right now, although some people did get original Bitcoins with serial numbers, right? But that idea that it's really a string of numbers, it's more like your credit card number. If you think of it that way, you can think about how sometimes, you get into the question of, are all of these securities, are all of them not? Or why is there this confusion? If you think about it, you could have a string of numbers and you could say, okay, whoever has this string of numbers is going to get to vote, right, on this particular item. Or whoever has this string of numbers is going to receive a profits interest or something like that. You could make it look like a traditional security, a debt security, an equity security. But also, if you think about, some of the big box, large software companies, when you buy Microsoft Office, and let me just say this quickly. Nothing is legal advice and nothing is investment advice. And nothing I say is on behalf of my firm. It's just my personal views. But when you get, for example, Microsoft Office, and when you're loading it, right, it asks you for your key. It asks you for your license, and that's a string of letters or numbers. I haven't looked at it recently. So you can see also how a digital token might be a software license in certain circumstances. It could also just be a string of numbers in a larger data set. So
can I add to that? So the way I tend to think about them, like I'm going to add to your foundation there, is that maybe I should use my disclaimer as well. But, okay, it is. So I tend to think of a cryptocurrency as having a separate value to an underlying asset that it might be pegged to. You're right, they're all tokens, but I differentiate a crypto asset like Bitcoin. Let's say I've got, let's make it up. I've got a token called Emmanuel tokens. And Emmanuel tokens can be used to buy. They exist. They don't exist. It's my first experiment in Bitcoin. I downloaded the code. I changed the word, and it'd be called Emmanuel tokens. They don't exist. I promise you. But let's say Emmanuel tokens can be used to trade bread, right? Well, bread has a separate price to Emmanuel tokens, and that's where you get the cryptocurrency piece from it. When you've got something that's a token used to buy something else, goods and services, that has a totally different price to the underlying crypto, that's how I tend to differentiate. Having said that, I actually find, and you asked about smart contracts, I find smart contracts a far more efficient way to explain financial products. And what I mean by that is, let's take a house, and let's think about a token for a second. And a token seems to be very binary. So if I own a token and I give it to, can't read I need glasses. Eric's in front of me, perfect. So if I have a token that represents my house and I give it to Eric, you all saw me do that transaction, and now Eric owns my house. The truth is, though, financial transactions are far more complex than that. So let's take my house again. And I view financial assets as having rights, obligations, and benefits. And we can trade any part of those. That's what derivatives are. So in my house, I could have the right to live there, the obligation to mow the lawn because I live in a nice community, and I get the benefit of capital appreciation. Now, if I rent my house to Eric, as opposed to just give him a token, I'm renting the house. I'm giving him the right to live there, removing my right to live there, but he doesn't have the obligation to mow the lawn or the benefit of capital appreciation. So, and that in financial services could be described as a repo, where I own the asset, equity, I repo it to him. He doesn't own it. He has the right to certain economic benefits, but that's really it. And that's really why we like using things around smart contracts, particularly in financial services, so that because it really does better define how complex financial capital markets works.
So I want to...
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm being the engineer, so I don't have to have a disclaimer here, but I look at this a little bit differently. And I am the co-founder of IX Ledger, which is on the blockchain. And we live in a world in which there's a lack of trust. There's a growing amount of data. data is actually worth a lot. And if you look at like the 20 most valuable companies on that are publicly traded, a lot of them are based on data, right? So data is worth a lot, and you need data to actually have sort of a trusted, effective, low risk, speedy, compliant transaction, right? So do you think people are going to give you the data and say, here, let me put it behind my firewall like iTunes does? It's like, no way in hell, right? So this idea of using the blockchain, which is a really good data manager, and having all these frenemies that own little shards of data relative to, asset-backed lending, insurance, or whatever that might be, and you bring all those parties together and you give them smart contracts as sort of like a toll bridge. They control the rules by which that data gets accessed. They're in total control. That smart contract they develop, they test, they make that available all throughout that closed environment. But then you put an economic layer on it, because that economic layer ensures that party gets paid immediately, not 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, but immediately, right? So you can take that economic layer, those tokens get used. You can use an exchange to actually convert to your fiat currency and pay for the assets. I often make a joke about OPEC as an ecosystem, and what would it be like if somebody, instead of using the dollar, decided to create an OPEC coin so that you could have total transparency in terms of where the money would go. You probably get shot and killed in an alley somewhere. But my point being is that the level of disruption that would occur would be huge. But if you can look at it from this environment where you want to speed up transactions, and everybody who's involved in that ecosystem, which may be more of a frenemy than peers, has total control over the transactions and the rules and the access to the data that they make available within that ecosystem. And that's a very different operating environment. And also, if you think about it, the way the money will flow is very different. OTC is all in dollars. OPEC is in dollars. A very large percentage of global trade is in dollars. So that's very disruptive, and it's kind of separate from thinking about the financial aspects, but it's about workflows and efficiencies and transparency. And I think that's where the real value is. So when you start looking at the value of these tokens, I think just the same way as JetBlue has a futures desk to figure out the price of oil, some of these organizations are going to have futures desks to figure out what these tokens are worth in order to be able to operate in these data environments.
By the way,
I'm going to wade into the deep end of the pool here a little bit, and I agree with everything you're all saying. Let me start, but I don't have a disclaimer, but Emmanuel sits on our board, and Josh chairs our largest working group, so I kind of feel like if I don't say the right thing, I'm going to get in trouble at the next board meeting. We often encounter that question: what is the difference between a digital currency and a token? And almost invariably, the question is, when they reference token, they mean an initial coin offering, broadly. And the simplest explanation that we discuss is we consider digital currencies to exist and have their existence because of a blockchain. Bitcoin exists, for want of a better phrase, as the unit of account for the Bitcoin blockchain. Ether exists because of the Ethereum blockchain. For the most part, tokens exist on top of blockchains. Tokens exist as app layers on top that build on top of blockchains for a variety of functions, and almost invariably, most of the token offerings that we're seeing, and you and I have spoken about token offerings probably far too much, are built on Ethereum, for example. And so that's the easiest thing that we offer our members around what is the difference, because it's part of that cutting through the noise. There's just so much of that cloudiness about the interoperability of these words and these names: digital currency, crypto asset, token offering. So that's how we approach that kind of delineation between the two.